Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
All right. Forgive me. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hi. Sorry. Forgive me. We are going to start now. Thank you. Folks, we're starting the meeting now, so if you don't mind, thank you very much. Mayor Westbrook is temporarily away. We wish him and his family all the best. I think Mayor Westbrook would be better suited to discuss that further in the future, but for now we just wish him all the best. So first things first, we're going to start off with the, before we do the adoption of the agenda, just recognize that we're on the traditional territory, the Coast Salish people, particularly our friends and neighbors in the Qualicum Nation. So first off with the adoption of the agenda, are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none from members of council, the agenda is adopted by consent. Start at the consent agenda. Staff recommendation for the items on the June 26th considered to be adopted. Just motion in favor for that. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, all in favor? Carries. And then moving on to delegations very quickly. Rosemary Graham and the folks from Flowerstone, please. Do you think you'll need more than 5 minutes? Okay.
Well, I don't know. It depends on how many questions you want.
Okay, no problem. Forgive me, Rosemary, just hit the button in the center and that'll turn on the green light. There you go. Oh.
Okay, so thank you very much, councillors and Mayor Westbrook, who's not here, unfortunately, for this opportunity to address you about a really critical need for recruitment at the Flowerstone Family Health Clinic. My name's Rosemary Graham. I'm the chair of the Flowerstone Family Health, or Flowerstone Health Society. We're a non-profit society that provides the governance, and we own the Flowerstone Family Health Clinic. There are approximately 12,000 residents in Oceanside who don't have a primary care provider, a GP or a nurse practitioner. Our urgent care center is overwhelmed. Our clinics are overwhelmed by phone calls every day from desperate community members looking for primary care. We're not alone in this. 1 in 5 Canadians, according to some reports, don't have a doctor or a nurse practitioner to provide their primary care. It's a desperate situation, and we're not immune to what's going on globally and nationally. Flowerstone's a clinic that is located in Qualicum Beach. I mentioned it's community owned, and we opened in the midst of a pandemic in 2020. It's been an uphill climb. You can imagine that we've had lots of lessons learned. This is a new model, a community-owned clinic, a clinician-led clinic. It's a new model, and we admit that there's lots of lessons learned. Currently, we serve 4,000 local residents. We have the capacity, however, to double this number, but we really need your help. We have room at Flowerstone for 9 nurse practitioners or physicians. Currently, we have 5 nurse practitioners. And we have about 4,000 patients, and we can double that to about 7,500 patients given our current size and the supports that we have in the community. To date, we've depended on the services of the Mid-Island, the Central Island Division of Family Practice and the Primary Care Network and Island Health to help with recruitment of nurse practitioners and physicians for our clinic. And to date, we have 5 since 2020. We've lost 2 and we've managed to replace them. Most of the people that we have replaced are novice nurse practitioners. So we have not been able to recruit or attract more experienced nurse practitioners. Unfortunately, since we haven't been able to, since these efforts really haven't been effective for us, we need to do something different. We all know that doing more of the same is not going to effect a change. So we are coming to you to ask for your help. To understand our challenges a little bit better, the clinic's direct operations are dependent on overhead funds that are provided by the nurse practitioners who work there. So that's $75,000 per clinician for direct operations of the clinic. Those funds don't cover indirect things like recruitment. And in addition to that, those funds have not increased since 2019. And we all know what's happened since 2019 when it comes to costs. So it's not nearly enough money, even if it did include recruitment, to cover those costs, except in this very general way that's been provided and has not been effective. And if we did take it out of there, it would compromise our ability to provide care to the community, and that is not acceptable to us. We are asking Council for $10,000 to cover an aggressive recruitment campaign led by Flowerstone Board and its clinicians. We plan to increase exposure to our clinic opportunities by promoting the clinic at universities and at conferences where both experienced and novice NPs or physicians attend. We'd like to advise them of the job opportunities at our wonderful clinic and in our community, which we're very proud of. We estimate that the cost of branded material, table rental, travel, and cost of personnel would be approximately $10,000. And while that sounds steep for recruitment, the cost of a table at a conference is about $4,000 to $5,000. Okay. The majority of the expense would then be the cost of the tables at the conferences. Promotional materials would be about $1,000, and then there's travel expenses that would be associated with that. So again, this is a new model. It's a community-owned clinic that we should all be proud of. A new initiative to help solve some of the desperate problems in healthcare. We recognize that there's lessons learned, but we also have an opportunity for our community to collaborate on many levels and make a difference. So we're asking our community leaders to contribute to the recruitment of family doctors and nurse practitioners in a very tangible and immediate way. We're proud to be here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Graham. Are there any questions from members of council to the delegation? Sorry, just in case. Councillor Vander, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I am wondering, in terms of the patient load that you have, my understanding is that it's not limited to the town of Qualicum Beach, people that live in the town of Qualicum Beach. So do you have a number of what the percentage would be from people that actually live in Qualicum Beach proper?
No, I don't actually have those numbers.
Okay. And have you approached Parksville or any of the other electoral areas for funding as well? Because I believe many of your patients are from those other areas.
Absolutely. So we have, as I say, lessons learned, and what we've learned is that we need to be very specific in our ask. And so we are coming today with a very specific ask, and our asks to date have not been as specific as we are asking today, and we've learned that recruitment is really our top need in order to carry on.
So my question was, have you also asked Parksville or any of the electoral areas for funding?
Not for recruitment. This is our first ask.
Okay, thank you. Also, you mentioned in your letter that's included in the agenda that you would like to, should the recruitment go well, you would like to look for some more space so that you can expand into the space. And the town had leased a medical office for 2 years in the hopes that that property could be used for medical care. I'm wondering, there were no takers for that, and I'm just wondering what the circumstances would be that makes this situation different from that situation.
So that's a great question. So as I mentioned, the recruitment of family doctors and nurse practitioners is generally done by the Division of Family Practice, and the lease of a space would be potentially Flowerstone Family Health Clinic. We have no say over that particular space, and in future spaces we'd like to be involved right from the beginning in the design of new spaces and in the decision, who works there and how. So we were not directly involved in the discussion initially about the Fern Clinic, but we offered to be of help. And so it was really not in our direct purview about how the recruitment for that position. But we want to be part of the solution, and we have offered that. So nobody came forward to lease the clinic or to pay the overhead, so we were unable to follow through. And in future, we would work collaboratively before the space opened.
Thank you.
Any questions from other members of council? Councillor Skipsey?
Thank you for your presentation and for all the work you do. I just had a question around timing. If there are deadlines or when these conferences happen, is it immediately, summer, fall, if there's a timeline?
Yeah, the next conference is in June, and we just, because of the timing of this, we had to go ahead with a conference, one in June, and the next one is in November.
Any questions from anyone? Councillor Young?
Thank you, Rosemary. Will you also be following through with Parksville to ask for funding support as well at some point?
Absolutely.
And also, will you also be hoping to offer evening and weekend appointments available for our local residents as well?
Such a great question. So as we increase the number of providers and the demand on our space has increased, we are committed to having extended hours for our clinic, and we have a commitment to extend into evenings and weekends. We also, I want you to know, are committed to this goal of recruitment of 9 providers in our clinic by the end of the fiscal year.
Councillor Young again.
I'd also like to ask this question to our planner, Mr. Sales. Is it true that from our DCCs that we get from our developers, that part of that is support for medical as well as for infrastructure?
Thank you. Through the chair. So development cost charges can't be used to support initiatives such as healthcare. However, I believe what Councillor may be referring to is during the discussion of a development approval for a property in the Eagle Crest area, there was an amenity contribution that was committed to at that time, where a significant portion of money was going to be given to the town, and council at the time had committed that money would be for a portion of the money would be for supporting healthcare services. Thank you.
Councillor Young, continue. Yeah.
Just a follow-up. The reason why I ask is that we did receive an email that it would cost our taxpayers an increase in taxes to support a funding ask like this right now. But so this will clarify it, that it will not increase our taxes, but they will be drawn from the amenity contributions.
Mr. Sales.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Harrison. Just to clarify, because the development that I referred to is still in the subdivision process, that funding has not yet been received. So while as you stated, council could choose to dedicate a portion of that funding for some purpose such as this, since the money is not in hand, it's hard to state 100% that that's a possibility. Thank you.
Councillor Young, carry on.
Sorry, what about, did we receive funding from Pheasant Glen?
Yeah, Mr. Sales, please.
Through the chair, during the development of Pheasant Glen, $450,000 was provided towards the town's affordable housing reserve account. So that was not intended for medical purposes. Thank you.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. If council would like to suggest a financial analysis for possibilities, that could be a direction to staff to come back at a future meeting for discussion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Varela. Ms. Varela and I had a conversation about this a couple days ago, and I thought that was a very wise course of action that she suggested at the time. I do think that this is probably the most pressing issue in our community. Folks do want to see progress on this, and at the end of the day, there is only one taxpayer, which means if the services need to be provided, I don't think too many folks will quibble too much on the niceties of which level of government is providing exactly the support. However, with the provincial election ongoing, we're going to get a lot of asks, I'm certain, as a council for provincial issues, so we have to be very careful where we choose to allocate funds. I just have a couple questions, forgive me. One is, so for the 9 positions, would that be fully funded through the Patient Care Network, the PCN?
Are you referring to the contractor's income and the overhead?
Just more, if you're going to expand it, I thought the existing for Flowerstone, the funding originally came from the PCN provided by the province. And so I'm just wondering, would that be then an expansion to the 9? Would that be all contained within the PCN, or would that be something where you're actually in a business case able to grow the number of nurse practitioners?
So I would just like to clarify that the Ministry of Health does provide contracted positions, and those contract positions come with overhead. And so that is how that works. The ministry is not responsible for anything else about the clinic. So the infrastructure funding, other than overhead, there is no infrastructure funding for recruitment, and they only provided money for startup of the clinic. It is not ongoing funding for the clinic.
Oh, yeah. Forgive me, that was pretty clear. I was just wondering more for the positions. Are they, is it contract through the patient care network? Because I know there was some additional positions with the PCN that have had a difficult time getting filled. So that's just more where I was sort of going.
That's correct. These are 9 PCN positions.
Okay.
Yeah. But we are not limited to 9 positions.
Thank you very much. And then there was one other question, which I've forgotten because I'm kind of stressed about this. With that, I think Ms. Varela suggested a very wise course of action. We usually don't agree to a request at the same meeting. That's been our practice as a council. I think we should continue it. But maybe just get a report at an upcoming meeting, whether it's the 10th or 17th of July. 10th, we have I think is it the 10th we have the Committee of the Whole? And the 17th, I think, is a regular council meeting. Forgive me, I'm just going off the top of my head. But I think either of those dates, whatever staff are capable of. And would that be an acceptable timeline? And I just remembered the question.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the question was just something Ms. Varela mentioned as well. Forgive me, I'm cribbing her some of her questions. But she mentioned that for some of these events that you're trying to attend for the purpose of recruitment, have you already booked the tables, or is that something you require the funding in order to book the tables?
We require the funding in order to book the table for November.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the June conference already took place, and so we needed to go ahead with that.
Fair enough, but it's really helpful to know the timelines. Thank you very much, Rosemary, and I really appreciate all the work you do. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. So Council is making application to meet with Island Health as part of the UBCM process. And if Rosemary would be so kind as to provide some of her notes, I know that could influence some of our inputs on that application intake. So.
Thank you very much. It's an excellent point, and certainly, the town's in a position where, as a nonprofit, because again, Flowerstone has a unique governance structure where they actually are a nonprofit provider that's very unique in BC. I think you guys were the first for nurse practitioners to run as a nonprofit model.
I think this community model was the first amongst the PCNs. There are a few other different types of models we're learning, but this was a community-owned clinic, and that's the first one.
Yeah. And then wherever we decide as a council, after this decision, we'll probably want to follow up with VIHA about how to make sure ongoing basis, because I'm sure it won't be 1 year of recruitment only. It's probably going to be an ongoing thing.
This community needs more than what we can do.
Yeah. But that'll be great to follow up on. So with that, I don't know who should make the motion. Councillor Skipsey, I'm sure you could word it.
That council directs staff to bring back a report to an upcoming council meeting on financial options for the request. Something like that.
And then was that Councillor Vander, were you seconding? Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? It carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Rosemary. Appreciate all the work you do. Forgive me. Next item on the business would be correspondence. There's nothing there. Is there anything that members of council wanted to raise for the correspondence log? Just for the public's information, we did send a letter to the Minister of Housing regarding Bill 44 several months ago. We received a response in the last couple of weeks. If citizens are curious what the letter says, I'm not going to try to summarize it lest I get anything wrong. But if they're curious to see what the minister says, just reach out to our staff and they'll be able to provide that letter to you. Moving on then to the next item of business, there's no public hearings. Bylaws, bylaw number 900, zoning for the entire town. I assume this would be Mr. Sales?
Yes, thank you, Chair Harrison. Next item on the agenda is regarding the This next item is very good. You may want to stay. If you don't mind, I'll just give them a moment. Ms. Augustine, would you mind telling them to bring the conversation somewhere else? Thank you. Okay, I will proceed. The next item on the agenda is regarding the implementation of the actions from the municipality regarding Bill 44 housing statutes, residential development, which was a provincial legislation that was passed last year. And there's a number of action items that are required, and this has been covered several times in council meetings previously. Just to summarize, Bill 44 mandates local governments to amend zoning to allow 4 dwelling units on almost all residential parcels. The town has a requirement to comply with this legislation by June 30th of this year. The zoning bylaw number 900 before you today has been drafted to meet the requirements of Bill 44. The bylaw has also been modernized by removing content that was no longer relevant and establishing new bylaws for clarity and ease of future updates, such as regulations and procedures for the Board of Variance and the Advisory Planning Commission. Interim residential design guidelines have also been incorporated into the current bylaw number 900. A complete analysis of the 3 bylaws before you today, as well as a further analysis of next steps in the implementation of Bill 44, was included in the May 29th, 2024 planning report to council. So if members of the public are interested in reading more about the background, that report did include more detailed analysis. For council's interest, a change log is included in this package, which documents in detail the changes that have been made since the May 29th council meeting. In particular, there have been a number of amendments to the definitions sections, reflecting questions from council, comments about ambiguity, as well as further staff revision that highlighted opportunities for increased clarity. So the memo does describe some of the specific questions that council raised in the last meeting, as well as their responses. So those are analyzed here. Specifically on the Advisory Planning Commission, there was some questions about whether the language was strong enough regarding the need for a referral for items to be considered by the APC. Staff don't recommend changes at this time on that matter. Similarly, there was a question about whether an amendment should be made to the language to clarify the role of the liaison, the council liaison for those Advisory Planning Commission meetings. And staff don't recommend a change at this time. However, in a future housekeeping amendment to this Advisory Planning Commission bylaw, it would be warranted to perhaps update or even remove that section, because the council liaison does not actually have a formal role in the Advisory Planning Commission meetings. With regard to the Board of Variance, the question was asked about what the town could do to avoid a circumstance where council refuses a development variance permit and then it's subsequently considered and potentially adopted by the Board of Variance. That isn't something that the town can prevent, because applicants do have the right to apply for a Board of Variance ruling, and staff or council cannot prevent that remedy. However, we can amend the development application fees and procedures bylaw, so that has been flagged for consideration perhaps this fall. So with that, there's a number of changes that have been made, and undoubtedly council will have some questions about either the changes or the bylaws in general, so I would be pleased to take questions at this time. Thank you, Chair Harrison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sales. Questions from council? Councillor Young.
Can I get clarification as to why, like, if they're allowed to have 4 units, that they can only have 2 titles?
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So there was some discussion about this in the last meeting. So you are absolutely correct that the way that the zoning is currently worded is that 4 dwelling units are permitted on residential lots pretty much through the entire town in the standard residential zones. However, there is a distinction between the development potential within the village neighborhood versus the development potential outside of the village neighborhood. And this came from discussions during the working group meetings that kind of helped formulate the design guidelines and also kind of crafting the zoning regulations overall. And that was that outside of the village neighborhood, the focus was more on the development of additional suites, whether that's secondary suites, carriage houses, or cottages on the property. And then also they recognized that duplexes would fit in quite well into the existing residential neighborhoods. Whereas the focus within the village neighborhood was to provide as much flexibility as possible in terms of both building form as well as tenure. So this is an area where there's not necessarily a right answer. However, the working group just felt that duplexes and suites were a better fit in terms of the form and character of the existing neighborhoods outside of the village neighborhood. And so that's why that distinction was made. Thank you.
Councillor Young?
Can we have that up again for further discussion? Because I received an email that is very compelling, and it seems reasonable to have 4 titles on 4 units to make it all affordable for more people.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you. I think what we'll do is we will add that to the list of potential housekeeping amendments for the future. Because certainly there will be items that require further review. And in the last meeting, council flagged a few that weren't simple amendments to make and required further discussion. So for example, the question about density bonuses. There are density bonuses identified in the zoning bylaw, and those were just carried straight from the old zoning bylaw into the new zoning bylaw without a discussion as to whether or not those density bonuses were actually the attributes of development that we're trying to encourage anymore. So there is a list of things that we intend to bring up in the future. Council has a few options. One, you could make a switch at this time, or we can put it on the list of things for further discussion later this year. And the other point I would just like to make is that just always keep in mind that what is allowed during this zoning bylaw update is not necessarily everything that's possible to develop in in an area. Rather, it's just saying what people have the right to do without applying for a zoning amendment. So if in some area what's allowed in the zoning bylaw before you isn't a good fit, whether it's the density or the setbacks or whatever that is, applicants always have the right to apply to council for a zoning amendment. So that's always an option for applicants and also for council. So it's not a question of whether or not something would be possible or impossible in the future. It's a question about what the process should be and whether every property owner is entitled by right to get it or whether they should have to go through an application process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Any other members of council? Councillor Vander Valk.
Thank you. I just am looking for some clarification. I think I understand in your definition of lock-off unit, my understanding is where a lock-off unit is a dwelling unit as opposed to a room with a bathroom, that would be considered 2 units, the larger unit and the lock-off unit. Is that correct?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Vander Valk. The definition of lock-off unit does have a few options. One would be a lock-off unit that doesn't have a kitchen, so it's not a fully enclosed dwelling unit with all the provisions for full-time living, whereas the lock-off unit can also be a self-contained dwelling unit that has everything you need, cooking facilities, washrooms, sleeping facilities. In that case, it would be considered a unit. That's the opinion of staff at this time. So there's nothing in the bylaw that would suggest otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. And on page 232 of your report, for the definition of an accessory hotel and a hotel condo, there has been a change made for limiting the time frame between April 15th and October 15th. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. It was brought up in the last council meeting that there were two very similar limitations on tenure within our resort condominium zones. So one of the zones, or one of the definitions had stated there was a maximum of 42 days in a 90-day period, and the other one stated a maximum of 46 with specific dates. And having two very similar but slightly contradictory definitions didn't make any sense. It was going to create confusion in the future, so we changed that so that both of them rely on the maximum 46 days within the April 15th to October 15th time period. So that's just for a consistency. It wasn't actually much of a content change, just for consistency between the two definitions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions from members of council? Councillor Skipsey.
I'll just comment that I did have some questions, but Mr. Sales has already addressed them. So, and I do appreciate that this must be adopted today in order to meet the provincial requirements. So, but he made it clear that there would be opportunity to come back and look at some of these things in more detail at a later date. So I would be happy to move that third reading be rescinded. Well, I would move all the recommendations if council is okay with that.
I think we might want to do the two readings separately, but we can do the first two together, the rescinding and then third reading. So if there's a seconder for that motion? Councillor Vander Valk, okay. And then just briefly, a couple of questions I had, sorry. Similar to Councillor Skipsey, I realize this is going to come back to us at a future date. I would highlight the conversation Councillor Young mentioned about the number of stratified units allowed by right. I think that's a good conversation to have. The density bonus was already mentioned by Mr. Sales. Another thing too is the definition of a bed and breakfast, whether we want to allow an ADU to be part of a bed and breakfast or not. And then enforcement with short-term rentals more broadly is maybe a separate conversation. But I know certainly this is going to come into my report later where we report what we did. There was a affordable housing conference that I did the quantitative data for our region, which I shared with Mr. Sales. And there are not a lot of rentals right now. And informally talking to the Councillor Vander Valk is the liaison to the Tourism Association, Blaine Sipos. Talking to Blaine, Mr. Sipos at an event, he mentioned that the listings are still sort of there. So there's an enforcement process, and that's maybe not something that we should be talking about at this meeting, but just if we do come down with enforcement, it's a town-led thing. We have to basically go to the province and say, we want you to enforce your short-term rental regulations. Then we might also want to make sure that, do we have to do anything for bed and breakfast so folks have a pathway? And then there was one more thing, and again, sorry, this has been such a huge meeting, and then suddenly I'm chairing, so it's a bit stressful. But I think, given that, just the last thing would be, what's the rough timeline for that touching of base to do the update on this bylaw, either Ms. Varela or Mr. Sales?
The update of the bylaw is currently planned for this fall, so to be determined. However, I think we'd be ramping up for a housekeeping amendment perhaps to begin in October.
And just through the chair to you as well, relating to the email that Councillor Young's referring to, is there a significant variance in the cost? I know there's a difference in time, so that is money ultimately for someone who's trying to build something. But is there a difference in cost in the application for a subdivision versus an application for a rezoning?
Thank you, Chair Harrison. Subdivisions and rezonings are two fairly distinct processes. I think what you're referring to is the process to create strata titles, as opposed to the subdivision itself. With the creation of strata titles, that's actually not something that the town approves. It's actually done directly between a land surveyor and the land titles office, and the land surveyor and the land titles office both refer to the zoning to ensure that there's no conflicts. The subdivision process, where you're actually dividing land by way of a fee simple subdivision, the application fees are fairly comparable, but the process is very different.
I do appreciate the processes are different, so I think it's a good conversation to have. But this is the one thing, as Councillor Skipsey mentioned, we do have to pass this today. We don't really have a choice unless we want to call a special meeting on the 29th or 30th, which I think no one wants to do today. So if there's no further questions from members of council, I guess we should. Okay, seeing no further questions. All in favor of rescinding third and moving third? Opposed? None. Carries unanimously. And now for the last little bit. Councillor Skipsey? Councillor Vander Valk? Okay. And this is just for adoption. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Next up, bylaw number 901. This is for the APC. Mr. Sales, is this your report?
Thank you, Chair Harrison. So the recommendation is adoption. It's a part of the package of information required to implement Bill 44. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sales. And just for clarity too, just before we get to that, Councillor Skipsey, just for the public who didn't attend the previous meeting, our APC bylaw, in essence, used to be contained within the zoning bylaw. So we're just splitting them up. So if we wanted to change something with the APC, we don't have to redo the entire bylaw for the whole town. That's just what's happening here. And anyone for the staff recommendation? Councillor Vander Valk? Councillor Skipsey? All in favor? Passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Sales. Next up, Board of Variance bylaw. Councillor Skipsey? Councillor Vander Valk? All in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, we're going on to reports now. The mayor obviously isn't here. We wish him well. Public safety is mine. So the biggest event probably in the last while was Show and Shine. It was an incredibly wonderful event. It is by far the busiest event in town. But the one thing I want to highlight is the pictures about 1 hour after Show and Shine. And what I was so impressed with is that you don't, with all the people milling around our downtown, you don't see garbage strewn around everywhere. You don't see a mess left for town staff to have to clean up. Folks did a really good job of essentially cleaning up after themselves and being respectful of the space. So it was great to see so many people in our downtown. And then when they went home, they were very respectful of the space. We have a lot of people visiting. I think, though, it's hard to imagine that everyone there would be from Qualicum Beach. So I just want to say a thank you to all the volunteers and also to the attendees who were so respectful of our downtown. That was really lovely to see. As I mentioned a second ago, we also, Susanna Newton from SOS and Violet Hayes from Island Crisis Care Society really got going a local housing task force, which is designed more for non-market housing, trying essentially to prevent homelessness. There's going to be an article in today's newspaper, I think, on that. So Jean was at the event and myself as well as Gord Johns and Adam Walker. I did a presentation on just stats and numbers. If you want it, send me an email. It's just a slide deck. I have no problem sharing it with folks. The numbers are a lot bigger than you expect, a lot bigger than I expected even, quite frankly. Yeah, it was a good event. There was a lot of good information. And now the follow-up after that is trying to look at how we can take, now that we've got information, how we can maybe look to work with nonprofits to see if they want to do something. Other than that, there was also tomorrow there's going to be Aerosmith Water Service meeting, but the most recent update, the big information is on our snowpack. So our snowpack in January and February was scary. It was actually not very good. It was very, very low, far below any measurement that we had previously. But with the relatively unsummer-like weather we've had so far, which is apparently going to change for July and August, but for right now it's been relatively balmy, our snowpack has basically caught up to where it normally would be. So that's the one advantage of the not very nice weather we've been having, is the snowpack is actually in line with more within the 25 to 75 sort of band of measurements. So that's actually a very good thing. I don't know, obviously, what's going to happen in terms of water restrictions and whatnot. That's going to be a more of staff-led conversation, but at least the snowpack isn't as critical as it could have been if we had a hot, dry spring like we did last year. And with that, I think that's everything. So moving on next to Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of motions under Parks and Recreation in the agenda. So before I move the recommendation from the committee, I would like to say that this motion came from the discussions that were taking place on mitigation and was intended as a respectful reminder to council of our commitment to consider everything through a climate lens. So I'll open up the discussion by moving the recommendation on behalf of the committee that council pause on the bus garage project public site and reassess the brief and renegotiate the design to include recommendations from the Sustainability Action Plan.
I'll second it for debate. I think we should have a debate on this. There's a lot actually to say here, so I would feel it would be a shame if it didn't get discussed. So any further discussion, Councillor Skipsey, before others?
Well, I think it was just a consideration that council has made this commitment, and some members felt like it wasn't perhaps being honored, or they didn't see how it was being honored in the design that had been presented, and they just want to make sure that there's starting to be a shift, you know, that we're seeing the results of this commitment in some of the projects and decisions that the town is undertaking, and I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skipsey. Any other members of council want to discuss this? Councillor Vander.
I would like some clarification if the planning department feels that these ideas have been incorporated into the design, or if there's any possibility that they might be. I've noticed in the staff comments that the bus garage final report and conceptual design will be before council in the third quarter of 2024. My understanding is we haven't really made any decisions about the design per se, just about the parking ramp. So is there an opportunity for these questions to be looked at?
Through the chair to Councillor Vanderbalk. So as you noted, the detailed design for this project hasn't been done. So there's lots of details when it comes to, materials, layout, water capture, groundwater recharge, solar energy generation. There's countless opportunities. However, I would highlight that the committee did point out what they saw to be kind of an irreconcilable conflict with some of these priorities in terms of the town's commitment to providing as much parking as there is. So the fact that the town is catering, to the automobile on, potentially half of the site, which is something that has, been determined through the site planning process. That's not likely to change. So I think that my understanding from the discussion was that was one element that isn't a detailed design aspect. It's simply the fact that the town has also prioritized continued access by way of the private automobile, which the committee was just highlighting as a potential conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sales. Any further questions? Just a few things for me. I think it's useful to get that feedback that some folks in the committee, or perhaps the majority of the committee, feel as though they're not sure how that council motion that we made, that everything is considered through a climate lens, how is that being implemented? And I think that while I don't necessarily support this motion per se, as it is going to come to us and we can then at that meeting refer it to the Environment and Sustainability Committee if we so choose, and that might be a little bit more appropriate sort of direction. But I do think too the fact that there is this sort of disconnect in understanding, I do think staff are trying their level best, but at the same time, are we reporting out on that? And do we have, it sort of comes in with this second motion with the matrix. Sorry, Councillor Skipsey and I briefly discussed this on Monday. Are there communities that have made a similar motion and then have established policies which say this is what it means, and that's something that folks could see? I do understand that we have this climate change adaptation plan, which is a pretty good plan, I think, all in all. And then folks might have questions about implementation. And I'm wondering if that might be something. I know we have a very full dance card, and loath as I am to say another report, but it might be something several meetings from now where we get a report out saying, here's what we're doing, and then folks also too might have the opportunity to, like, again, as more documents for the Sustainability Committee in the distant future, they can look at that and say, okay, this is what we think of it. But I don't support this motion per se, again, as I mentioned earlier, but I do think there's a great conversation here. Ms. Varela, sorry, you raised your hand.
Thank you, Chair. So I think there's 2 points. Certainly there's a lot of great work that can be done coming out of the matrix. I think we would see that added to Council's 2025 Blue Sky list for you to consider resourcing in the upcoming strategic planning process this fall. Additionally, I did want to flag that this item was not referred to the committee. It did hit the agenda without it being listed there. So I do have a bit of a process difficulty with this. And if Council wanted to refer the item back to the committee with very clear instruction, because when you look at the terms of reference, it's quite vague. So I'd like to see what is the advice or input that Council is actually seeking. So perhaps we could discuss that at an upcoming meeting, and there could be formal referral if you do want this lens on this project.
Thank you very much, Ms. Varela. And I do agree, it'd be very helpful to be specific, just because there are so many things you could do which have an environmental benefit. And this is going to be a very complicated plan. So we do want to manage the scope of how much work we're asking staff to do prior to that environment sustainability meeting. Councillor Skipsey.
So based on Ms. Varela's comments, then, I wonder if it would be appropriate to defer this motion, or whether the preference is to defeat it and then go from there.
I'm fine either way, depending on the will of Council. I think if you wanted to defer it, we'd have to defer it to us potentially being received with that report. And if we defeat it, it's cleaner, but we probably want to keep something tabbed that this might be an outcome. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. So the motion, essentially, the direction it would provide to staff is to halt the work on the bus garage project. And given the stage where we are in that conceptual design, that would be very challenging to do. So even if Council deferred this motion to a future date, it's unclear whether Council would be expecting that final report to come forward or not. So I think my recommendation would be to take no action on this, and so it would be defeated. And then in the future, Council will undoubtedly be considering both that conceptual design and the action items flowing out of that conceptual design. And you can take this advice. I'm sure you'll be remembering it in one form or the other, and see what we can do to incorporate climate action into that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sales. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. Upon closer review of the motion that's before you as well, there is an incongruence in there, if you will, because it's saying for Council to pause, and then we would also start to renegotiate the design. So there's a pause and an action all wrapped up in there. So I would support the recommendation to defeat.
Yeah, or it could also be withdrawn, just saying that as an additional thing. I don't want to put Councillor Skipsey on the spot, just saying those are the range of options and we can do what we wish.
Well, there was a discussion at the last meeting about this and how the process is supposed to work and whatnot. So I think that I don't want to withdraw it, because I do want to honor the committee in making the recommendation, but I think they would understand why it would be defeated.
Thank you very much. Is there any further comments from any other member of Council? Councillor Young.
Is there somehow that we can kind of take some of the suggestions from the committee and put it into the design of the bus garage plans?
Thank you very much. Before I get ahead of staff, I would suggest that there's a second motion, and that might be something where some of the overarching concerns could be addressed without getting too specific and binding staff's hands on the work they need to do on that particular site. But that's a fair point to raise. Is there anything staff wanted to add to that, or Mr. Sales?
Thank you. Through the chair, I don't think there's action required at this time. It will be coming back to council for consideration of the conceptual design and also further action items such as the detailed design for the park and amenity space as well as the parking areas. So this will be back before council, and council can choose to incorporate elements of perhaps the next item on the agenda and that sustainability matrix into that future process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sayles. Are there any further questions or comments from members of council? Okay, seeing none, then on the motion as presented, all in favor? All in favor? Sorry, Councillor Young, I'm not sure if you're in favor or not. Okay, and then opposed? Okay, so the motion fails. Now number 2, Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, so I do want to publicly thank the committee members and staff for all of their work on this matrix. There is a lot here to consider, and I believe that the committee would prefer to have it considered and resourced rather than adopted and sit on a shelf. So for that reason, I would like to move staff's recommendation.
Councillor Vander, seconding. Yeah, and forgive me, Councillor Skipsey, please, you should carry it.
Well, that's okay. I just think that there is a lot. It kind of reminds me, I guess, of the action plan in another report that we're seeing later on the agenda. But there are a lot of items, and some of them are maybe quicker and easier to resource. Others would take quite a bit of resources from the town staff and or financial or long-term planning. And so I think really having a more fulsome discussion about the items in the matrix would be beneficial for council.
Thank you very much. And I would point out, I strongly agree with the staff recommendation. I think resourcing the climate change adaptation plan is very important. So that's sort of why I push for the accessibility plan. Same reason. If you don't resource it, then it's likely to sit on a shelf. Yeah, are there any further comments from members of council on this? Okay. Then on this, to refer it to the strategic planning, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. And anything further, Councillor Skipsey, for your report?
I do have a few things, so please bear with me. On June the 7th, I attended the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region Roundtable, and I just wanted to make a comment that they now have the presence within town in the Lee House, and they are also going to be hosting the Thursday night market this year. So it's great to see them being more visible in the community. On June 9th, I was at the Qualicum Woods picnic at Crystalton Park, and it was a great day and wonderful to see so many families out enjoying community. June 10th, I hosted the council open house, and some of the issues or the major issues raised included the future of the Qualicum Commons, maintenance of the town-owned land between the houses in Westridge and Laburnum Road, the need for a second bylaw officer, whether there will be monitoring of the impact of the provincial legislation, what's happening with the short-term rentals. Also, an outstanding request for financial information related to the airport and golf course. Healthcare was a topic, as it is at almost every opportunity, and the request for an update on the status of the landscaping at the Eagle Crest Cell Tower. So that was that. And then also that day I attended the RDN, in the mayor's absence, I attended the RDN's Oceanside Services Committee. And for the first time in a long time, there was approval of a small increase to some of the fees and charges at Oceanside Place and as well as Ravensong Aquatic Center. So, and these were approved by the board at yesterday's meetings. So just a heads up. June 17th, I attended the Beach Day meeting, and we're getting close now, so make sure that July 21st from noon until 4 is on your calendar. It's going to be a wonderful day, lots of fun. And June 18th, I attended the Nanaimo Regional Hospital District Board meeting, and there was a presentation by the Fair Care Alliance. I'm not sure how many people have heard of them, but they are advocating for greater equality in healthcare north of the Malahat. In the afternoon, I attended the Solid Waste Management Committee meeting, and I think there's some good news there for us. By using technology, particularly a GPS and a giant shredding machine, as well as relooking at the contours of the landfill with an increase in the available landfill airspace, they are estimating an additional lifespan of the landfill of approximately 5.4 years, which could push the projected closure of the landfill out to the mid-2040s or even later. And so hopefully we can also continue to reduce the amount that's ending up in the landfill. I find it interesting. I know there is has been a lot of growth in this area, but in 2023, the region landfilled more than 82,000 tons of waste, with a diversion of approximately 67%. And the annual material volume has increased by about 30% since 2019, when it was at 60,000 tons. And it's believed that this is a reflection of strong post-pandemic regional economy and also changes in waste flows. June 21st was the Environment and Sustainability Committee, where we started discussion around food security and what a food action plan for the town might look like. And June 22nd, it was exciting to watch the KSS graduating class parade as they went through town. And then I followed them to Arbutus Meadows to see them walk the red carpet. So I would like to congratulate each and every graduate for achieving this milestone, and to the parents and teachers and support staff as well. And my final note is that we will be having our 40th KSS grad reunion this summer on July 12th and 13th. And anyone wanting more information, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skipsey. Councillor Vander.
I have submitted my written report, which is in the agenda. I would like to highlight a couple of the points to do with the conference I attended in Calgary for the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The main topic of discussion was the fact that the FCM created the Municipal Growth Framework, a document outlining a way in which the federal government can help municipalities provide the infrastructure needed to support the rapid growth of population in Canada. Currently, municipalities receive only 8 to 10 cents on each tax dollar, while they provide about 60% of the infrastructure needed by their communities. This municipal growth framework would help to ensure that municipalities receive funds directly from the federal government on a consistent basis, rather than having to consistently spend time, money, and energy to apply for funding grants. This could be very beneficial to Qualicum Beach. Remains to be seen if it will come to fruition. The FCM also expanded its Green Municipal Fund, which offers municipalities funding opportunities for climate change adaptation projects. These funds fall under a number of categories, such as tree canopy studies and growth, sustainable municipal buildings, electrification of municipal fleets, sustainable affordable housing, or organic waste energy, for example. This funding, too, could be of great benefit to the number of town projects. I have given staff the information on these initiatives, which hopefully will bring positive results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vander Valk. And I think the Green Municipal Fund, the railway project, got about $50,000 for energy modeling through that back in the day. So it is something where we have got a little bit of money in the past. Councillor Young.
Oh, and I just want to let Trudy know that it's a unanimous vote on the, where I'm opposed to pausing the bus garage. Sorry, I raised my hand at the wrong thing. Anyways, reporting on...
I'm sorry. The vote was taken, and
I did.
you voted in favor, and the chair needs to
So
call
sorry.
that?
But
Or you
it,
voted
It passed.
opposed?
I think
So-
the vote's already passed, but if Councillor Young wants to say that that was a mistake or an accident publicly, I mean, that's on the public record now. I don't think we necessarily need to redo the vote and everything and rescind and redo
Yeah.
it. So, but just Councillor Young has clarified on the record, so if folks are curious where she stands, it's now public record.
So
Please carry on, Councillor Young.
unanimous
Sorry for the
opposed.
interruption.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry for that. Okay, Arts and Culture Report. Summer is here, so lots of summer events. The Qualicum Beach Museum is open from Tuesdays to Saturday from 10 to 4. They also have Qualicum Beach Reads, which is presenting a music and metaphor evening with pianist and composer Gina Adams and Mickey Finley, Vancouver Island award-winning author for storytelling and poetry. We have lots of local events that are staged for the summer, so check these items out. The Lee House, which is now run by Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region, and it's a public outreach center. They right now have the bee pollinator exhibit. It is open to the public from 10 to 2, Friday, Saturday, and Thursday. And currently they have preschool groups going through. And they're also organizing the Qualicum Beach Thursday night market, and save your Thursday nights in July and August to attend, whether you're as a vendor or as a consumer. It's a wonderful, lovely thing to do on a summer evening. Another event was held by the old schoolhouse. It was last Friday, a sold-out venue. Tea by the Sea, another wonderful summer celebration. And then this afternoon, we have tea at 2, another garden party, also organized by volunteers, and this one to support Guatemalan school by locals doing a global outreach. And also, this long weekend is coming up. It's Canada Day celebration. Tonight, Rotary volunteers are putting up the Canada flag for any of the residents that have paid to be on this program. And also check with the Legion if you'd like to participate in the parade, and do check out the activities that are planned for Canada Day. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. And I do apologize to all the council. There was one thing I forgot, which is actually kind of important, not for our community necessarily, but maybe for your family. If you have family in the Okanagan or the Northern Interior, the province has rolled out a new program for folks who have to evacuate, particularly for a wildfire. So it allows folks to directly access government benefits as opposed to having to go through essentially the EMO. And it's an increase in the amount of money that folks who need to evacuate in the event of a wildfire can receive. So kudos to the provincial government for helping folks who have lost their homes. And with that, we'll go on to staff reports and the annual report. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. There have been a few minor housekeeping additions or edits since the agenda was published, particularly on page 39 and 40, which saw the international identifier XQU removed from the document in a couple places, as well as the town of Qualicum Beach removed from the org chart for consistency. There has been other minor formatting and punctuation corrections since agenda publication, but I think we're pretty good to go, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Varela. Are there any comments from members of council on this? Seeing none, I'll just say that this is a tremendous amount of work. And for citizens who are wondering where your taxes go, this gives you a pretty good idea. It's a very thorough document. I did feel sort of badly for our planning staff, seeing at the hike in number of memos projected for next year. Sorry, guys. But it is a very thorough document, and for things like our water report, our annual report, these are documents you can access on our website. So if you're having a hard time finding the document on the internet, do reach out to our staff and they'll be able to provide you the link so you can find that information yourself and go through all the information in the report. And obviously I won't comment more because it's a very long document and we have a pretty long meeting. So with that, the staff recommendation is just for the report to be accepted. Councillor Vander got off the bat first, and then Councillor Skipsey. All in favor? Passes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Varela, and for all the members of staff for putting that document together. It's a lot of work. Moving on to the announcement of closed meeting motions. Ms. Varela, just to clarify, we've got a lot of emails, and I think there's some confusion about what this means in the community.
Thank you, Chair. So I will just walk through some briefing notes that have been prepared. So we recognize there is some confusion about item 10.1b on the agenda. It is not an agenda for a motion today. It is the announcement of a motion of council which was previously made at a closed meeting. Closed meetings are held when it involves matters relating to land, labor, or law, and then council rises out in this format. The resolution arising was that council directs staff to provide a letter of support for Island Hopper Air Training to operate a flight school from the Qualicum Beach Airport, subject to approval by Transport Canada. In addition, there was a staff comment included on the agenda which states council does not have the legislative authority to restrict airport operations. The authority of decision-making for aeronautics, including flight schools, is federal jurisdiction. We would like to add that the airport was developed on land provided by Crown Grant for the sole purpose of operating a public airport with associated uses. It should be noted that the use of a flight school is a permitted land use at the airport, and the town has no regulatory tool to not support a permitted use or to act as a quasi-competition bureau. I always use the analogy, council couldn't say you only want 2 barbershops in town or something like that, so that should be noted. We also want to note that flight schools not based in Qualicum Beach also fly in and out of the airport on a regular basis. Flight schools are within the realm of aeronautics, which is federal jurisdiction and regulated by Transport Canada. In closing, I would like to note that the town's goal is to balance the operations of a municipally owned airport and neighborhood expectations. Recognizing that everyone has different expectations for the airport, Council will be considering developing a master plan within its Council's strategic planning process for 2025, which will happen this fall. So again, more opportunities for the public to weigh in. I'll also take the opportunity to promote the July 10th open house, which is the airport forum discussion where the public can come address council, and that will be happening at 4 o'clock. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Varela. I appreciate the clarification on that. And also, too, just to reiterate, the federal legislation really constricts our ability to make decisions at the airport. One of the things that you do in camera, too, is that concerns about identifiable individuals. So if you knew someone involved with this potential business had a checkered background, to put it politely, that'd be a great thing to not discuss in public. So there is a reason we do that in camera. I know some folks are very concerned about this, but it is something which is more in the purview of the federal government. And then the other motions are just announcements, which is public and folks can read that. So moving on to municipal operations. And we're looking at the BC Hydro leased streetlights and the quote to review. Was that Mr. Watson? Mr. Watson, please.
Thank you, Chair Harrison. Yes, so you may remember at our last regular meeting of council on May 29th, we discussed all of the complaints that we had received about BC Hydro streetlights between September 1st, 2023 and May 1st, 2024. And in that report, there were 25 BC Hydro streetlight complaints where we had already reduced the wattage and the color temperature of the lights, yet the residents were still unhappy with the results. So the outcome of that meeting was that staff would source a price for a third-party electrical engineering firm to follow up on those complaints to see if there are options available to reduce them any further. And we did receive a quote from E2 Engineering. They do have the expertise and the specialty equipment required to perform this task, and they are familiar with the specific lights that BC Hydro use. So they gave us a quote of $14,500 plus GST to review the 25 submissions, and that includes capturing existing light levels, generating report to capture findings and observations on existing site conditions, providing feedback to the town on findings, and to assist in recommending additional directions/solutions, if available, to BC Hydro for consideration through the utilities SLIM system, and to assist with any coordination with BC Hydro if required.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watson.
So, not quite done, sorry.
My apologies.
So in our budget, we had $31,800 available, and so the cost was $14,500 for this project, which would essentially leave $17,300 for repairs if that was available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Watson. Sorry for that. My apologies for cutting you off. And just on that last point, I believe, if staff can refresh my memory from the previous meeting, was it $1,400 roughly per light is the cost, approximately?
Yeah, I believe it's $1,465.
Thank you very much. So I don't see a need for division on this. I think we could take the two of them together, as they seem. Councillor Skipsey moved. Councillor Vander Valk seconds. Councillor Skipsey, if you wish. Sorry.
Sure. I'll just say that I'm happy to see this come forward. I thought we were getting this kind of report a long time ago when we asked for a report. So anyways, I think this is going to be helpful.
Thank you very much. I think as we're still operating within the budget, this is a pretty reasonable request. I believe this is the same firm who provided us with the original report. So they're somewhat familiar with our community. So this is probably going to be what, it's going to be what, forgive me, I'm going to say that I think one or two people might be disappointed that the report will say there are wires and we can't fix the light near your house, but this is the best we can honestly do as a town, in my view. With that, any further comments from members of council? Seeing none, all in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next up, the Quatna Road water main replacement. Mr. Watson again?
Thank you, yes. So this project started back really in 2017 when we experienced a fracture in one of our 150 millimeter AC asbestos cement water mains through an undeveloped piece of right-of-way along Quatna Road between Hall Road and Hemsworth. And at that time, we installed a temporary clamp, and since then we've been needing to replace that portion of AC water main. So we've added that to the 2024 financial plan with a budget of $150,000. The project itself includes about 60 meters of AC water main replacement and the relocation and renewal of a fire hydrant specifically up on Quatna at the intersection itself. So we would relocate that hydrant to a more suitable location where it's fed off of a larger water main than it currently is. So the project went out to tender to 5 local qualified contractors. The bids range between $113,537 to $140,800, with David Stalker Excavating submitting the lowest price of $113,537 plus GST. As a reminder, we do have $150,000 in our budget for this. We've spent $6,000 so far in engineering. The soft costs are not included in their price, of course. So the project management and supervision is estimated at $9,000, and we should also include a contingency of $17,000. So overall, between the cost to date and the cost for the project, we anticipate it to be $145,537, which leaves us $4,463 under budget. So with that, we okay to proceed?
Thank you very much, Mr. Watson. So the staff recommendation is that we award the contract to David Stalker Excavating. Councillor Vander Valk? Councillor Young? Okay, thanks. And yeah, this is sort of the meat and potatoes. Any comments from members of council? This seems pretty straightforward. Something has failed. We need to do the permanent replacement. We've done a fix, and now we need to do it right. So with that, call the question. All those in favor? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Watson. Now, forgive me, as we go on to the Roundabout art proposal. Mr. Watson again.
Thank you. Yes, this has been a pretty exciting project. We have been wanting to put a piece of art in the center of the roundabout there for some time, and we've been in touch with Mr. Jesse Ricalma from the Qualicum First Nations. He's one of the local artists. And we have received a proposal from him to produce a piece of art for the center of the roundabout. Through our discussions, we made a bit of an agreement on what the dimensions should be. One, it's based on the size of the roundabout itself, and two, it's for safety purposes. We don't want anything overly large that'll interfere with sight distance. So in the end, we do have a proposal from Mr. Rocalma for $8,000 to design the piece of artwork. And essentially, if we scroll down to page 356, we'll see this isn't the piece of art. This is something that will look similar to. This is a piece of art that Harry James created for Park Royal. And one of the features we like about this in particular is that there's something to see from all sides. So coming into a roundabout from any direction, we'll have something to look at. Furthermore, we'll light it up as well. We have plans on lighting it. When we constructed the roundabout, we included conduit from the nearby electrical kiosk to the center of the roundabout for this purpose. And the dimensions are going to be potentially 12 feet tall by about 4 feet in diameter, so it'll be cylindrical in shape. Jesse is still working on the design itself, but he's said that he is using the Salish bear totem pole that was carved by Simon Charlie, that was originally down at the intersection of 19A and Memorial years ago, and has since been relocated up to the museum as inspiration. As far as costs go, we carried over $49,000 into our 2024 financial plan that was left over in the roundabout project last year. We spent $7,000 this year so far installing all that gravel, the driftwood, and the rocks that you see in there now. The artist fee is anticipated to be, or the artist fee has been proposed to be $8,000. Fabrication and production and placement of the art piece is $30,000. Engineering, electrical, and the concrete base installation required to place the art piece on would be just over $20,000. In total, the project is expected to cost $65,100, which exceeds our initial budget amount by $16,100. And staff are suggesting we reallocate the excess that we have remaining in a separate budget line item, which is the 19A ditch and fill parking, the phase 1 project that we carried over from last year. And so the recommendations are that council authorize staff to proceed with the production of this art piece through Mr. Jesse Ricalma, and that the additional funding come from the 19A infill parking that was carried over from last year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watson. I assume we take these two together, unless members of council have an alternate funding stream they'd want to suggest. So with that, and anyone want to move the staff recommendations? Councillor Vander, Valk? Councillor Young? Discussion? Any members of council? So I'll just reiterate the one question which I asked Mr. Watson previously. In terms of safety, I think it's called the TAC manual, which talks about all things roundabout. Were there any conflicts with the installation of this art and potential safety issues relating to the roundabout operation itself?
Thank you, Chair Harrison. Yes, we did reach out to Coors Engineering to ask those questions specifically, and they did review the TAC manual, the Transportation Association of Canada manual for roundabouts, and determined that we could actually put something right out to the edge of the curbing and obstruct view from from that width if we really wanted to. In this case, we're only 4 feet in diameter in the center, so there would be no safety concerns whatsoever for this art piece.
Thank you very much. And what was also discussed earlier with staff is that if there is going to be a plaque describing everything, it is not going to be at the center of the roundabout for obvious reasons. Okay, and with that, any further questions from members of council? Moving the question then, all those in favor? Opposed? It carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Watson. I appreciate your reports. Thank you. Moving on to fire rescue. This is where I believe we have the consultant in-house. So with that, and this is Mr. Shields, I believe, who's presenting on it. Thank you very much. And just the button in the center, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Harrison. And thank you, councillors, for having me here to speak today to this project, the development of a community wildfire resiliency plan for the town of Qualicum Beach. I've been introduced by Chair Harrison. I am Matthew Shields. I work for a company called Diamond Head Consulting. I am a registered professional forester as well as an ISA certified arborist. I've been working in the wildfire prevention space of forestry for most of the past 5 years. I also work extensively on urban forest strategic plans. So I like to see communities working with sort of those two aims in harmony. So preventing wildfire as well as supporting our urban forest, which I know the town of Qualicum Beach cares deeply about. My presentation for you today, I have 10 slides just going through sort of a high-level overview of the plan. There's a focus on some of the action items that are being prioritized for implementation if the plan is to be endorsed. And then we'll have time for questions as well. So, could I have the next slide, please? Oh, actually, I can do it, can't I? Yes, I can. Right. So the background to the project, we've been working on this project since the fall of last year, and it's being funded through the province's Community Resiliency Investment Program, something called the Fire Smart Community Funding Supports Stream. And so that source of funding is dedicated for local governments and municipalities to invest in wildfire prevention through strategic planning. And so the plan that's been prepared for your consideration is part of the new generation of the province's local wildfire planning program, which was initiated all the way back in 2004 as something called the Strategic Wildfire Prevention Initiative. That's now the CRI. And it replaces the town's current Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which was completed in 2007. As I've mentioned, the plan has been funded by a grant received through the UBCM from the Community Resiliency Investment Program, and the plan is following the most up-to-date template provided by that provincial program for community wildfire resiliency. So just touching on the timeline, as I've mentioned, the context here is that the previous comparable document was prepared all the way back in 2007, and there have been some substantial changes since then in the shape of the town's forests and what we call its wildland-urban interface. So in 2023, the contract was awarded to Diamond Head for us to prepare this new document. That led through to some field assessments. I was here on the ground with a colleague in parks and public lands throughout the community, conducting what are called wildfire threat assessments, which assess the potential for a forested environment to support wildfire behavior. And we also conducted community engagement at that time. The plan has been prepared through the spring, and here we are today. And then, of course, it contains, as I've mentioned, several action items which will need to be pursued in the future if Council endorses. So a little bit on our engagement process. There is guidance through the planning program in order to sort of suggest what engagement should include. For this plan, it included sending information sharing letters to First Nations, as well as tenure holders like Mosaic Forest Products on the land base. There was also an online public survey that was completed by 130 people in Qualicum Beach, which asked people to tell us about their priorities and concerns around wildfire in the community. And then during February, congruent with field work, we hosted 2 community information pop-ups, as well as an in-person open house and question and answer at the Qualicum Beach Civic Center. And in total, those in-person opportunities, over 50 people attended. So diving into the meat of the plan here. So what the plan finds is that moderate risk is typical throughout the wildland-urban interface, and to dig into that a little bit, so moderate risk is means that much of the public land base, because we do just look at the risk on the public land base through this program, moderate risk means that the public land base can be expected to support wildfire ignition during the fire season, though the most severe fire behavior is unlikely during a typical fire season. And that severe fire behavior would mean crown fire, which you may have seen images of, which is a fire where all the fuel layers in a forested environment become involved in the blaze. So to address the moderate risk that the plan finds, it makes 31 recommendations in total, which are themed by what we call 7 fire-smart disciplines. And the structure of the plan in that way also reflects the requirements of the funding program. And 15 of those recommendations have been identified as high priorities for implementation and should be advanced for implementation within 2 years if the plan is adopted. And we also believe that implementing those recommendations would require additional staff capacity, which I'll have more comments on in a second. The bright side of the story is that most of the recommendations that are supported through this plan are eligible for future grants through the same program that produces the plan. So you'll see if you read through the action plan at the back of the document which actions potentially could be offset in terms of their cost through that same funding program. So I know we are a little pressed for time on the agenda here, so I'll try to run through the next couple slides fairly quickly. But I did want to give Council a chance to look at some of the priority actions together with me. So the first, I should say, the next 2 slides will contain all of those 15 priority actions I mentioned. The first 3 here on this slide with the red underline under their numbers, those are actions that lead the plan because they are the ones that are required in order to maintain funding eligibility for future years of the Community Resiliency Investment Program. And so they include conducting a review of the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. So if the plan is adopted, it will need to be reviewed every 5 years. And we also recommend that the action plan be reviewed by staff each year to ensure that we have good tracking on implementation. The second is to support a fire smart and wildfire resiliency position within Qualicum Beach Fire Rescue. So having a fire smart position in your community is one of those requirements for funding eligibility that needs to be satisfied. And then the third is the participation in a regular, what's called a Community Fire Smart and Resiliency Committee meeting. And that typically would involve a number of different stakeholders as well as parties in emergency management. And in the case of Qualicum Beach, it satisfies this requirement by participating in quarterly regional meetings. The rest of the recommendations, since we are pressed for time, I think I will entertain questions if any member has had the opportunity to leaf through and has a particular interest in some of them. They are themed on this slide and the next by those fire smart disciplines. So in blue you have recommendations that are related to public outreach and education. In yellow that refers to recommendations that would change potentially town programs or bylaws. Orange is development considerations, so giving thought to the ways that the development process and how private property can become involved in reducing the risk of ignition and fire transfer from forested environments to private property. And I should highlight here that some of these recommendations do involve considering further amendments to town bylaws. That pinkish color there, number 19, that's all about training, securing the appropriate training for emergency response staff in Oceanside as well as the Qualicum Beach Fire Department. While green is about how we prepare for an emergency and focuses on emergency planning strategically. And last but not least, I need to take care to introduce is that sort of pinkish red color down in the bottom. These are all recommendations that go to vegetation management. So if wildfire risk is primarily influenced by the threat of fuels in forested environments, what can we do in order to either reduce that fuel environment or reduce its potential risk and flammability? And so those recommendations include working to implement the assessments of a fire smart a fire smart assessment, for critical infrastructure, which is also identified in the plan. Continuing fire smart vegetation management in the town's heritage forest, which has occurred in the past. And as well, advancing certain locations for potentially larger scale fuel management, which I have some closing thoughts on. So the way that fuel management and vegetation management is talked about by this program, it is split into sort of two approaches, which I've hinted at. The first being large-scale fuel management, and this is really a reference to the creation of a fuel management prescription by a registered professional forester. 7 potential areas on public property throughout the town were identified as perhaps benefiting from the consideration of fuel management, of which 3, which you can see in yellow on that map, are considered high priority, and those locations include the community park, as well as 2 parcels to the south of the fire hall and the west of Pheasant Glen. So the next step, if the plan is endorsed, would be, for vegetation management, that is, the next step would be to start developing those fuel management prescriptions, which would guide a vegetation management approach. On the other hand, I know that there has been a lot of interest in sort of this aspect of wildfire risk. Small-scale management, which can include removing small branches, foliage, pruning out, the lower parts of the crowns around trail side and other infrastructure within parks. It can be a very appropriate and successful approach, and it is recommended at a number of locations throughout the town to continue including the heritage forest at this time, as well as around critical infrastructure. And such programs could be expanded in the future as well with the support of this document. So with that, I'll close, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shields. Are there any questions from members of council on the document, on the presentation or the document? Councillor Young first.
Hi. Have you taken into consideration our tree bylaw and how some of that should be changed a bit to help with the fire mitigation?
Thank you, through the chair. So the tree protection bylaw, it is part of consideration of it is part of developing the plan. So we do go through a process to review existing town bylaws and documents to see what sort of policies are, how they may influence wildfire risk. In my opinion as a professional forester and certified arborist, I didn't find that the tree protection bylaw as it currently stands is going to be, the most significant barrier to residents who may want to fire smart their own properties. And some thoughts I have there are that the current tree bylaw defines a protected tree as something larger in size than 30 centimeters diameter breast height, so a measurement taken at 1.4 meters above grade on the tree. So you, and as well, so that's any species as well as 5+ centimeters diameter for certain special ecologically significant native species. And with those kinds of requirements, we find mainly that on private property, the real fire hazards are coming from small shrubs and trees that would be smaller than 30 centimeters in diameter that are located in close proximity to people's homes. So I guess that is to say vegetation that is the lowest hanging fruit in terms of improving fire resilience on people's properties and around the community infrastructure as well is going to be things that are not requiring a tree permit. That is my opinion. There are some cases where, of course, it is going to be a site-by-site sort of assessment, which is why the plan recommends developing a home assessment program for Fire Smart so that, people in the community can get more detailed advice that is particular to their property. But in my review of the tree bylaw, it didn't surface as a significant barrier to implementing some of these recommendations.
Thank you very much. Anything further? Councillor Vander, Valk.
Thank you. I was going to ask that question as well, so thank you for that. I just think that many people feel that a more natural, environmentally friendly approach to forest management is preferable over more invasive practices. For example, using selective logging as opposed to clear cutting, or leaving fallen branches and leaves and trees to remain so that they will add to the organic matter in the forest. Do you see a way that that more sensitive approach might be incorporated into this plan?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, through the chair. With regards to fuel management, often it does end up being a site-by-site process. So what the CWRP is not, is it is not a specific recommendation for a type or intensity of fuel management. Those properties that showed up on the map I showed on a couple slides ago, the process to develop a fuel management prescription, it could result in any number of outcomes. What it would involve is a registered professional forester going to the site and making more detailed investigations about the fuel loading in that environment to pinpoint the precise factors that could be influenced to reduce risk. And since a registered professional forester is a regulated profession in British Columbia under the Professional Governance Act, that professional will have to meet certain standards with regards to environmental quality, as well as other legislative mandates. So fuel management could take the form of very delicate treatments involving mainly manual labor in some parks to reduce, just sort of the lower branches of trees or small trees, as well as smaller dead trees that have been shaded out in the understory and are now presenting an opportunity for fuel or fire to ladder from those fuels down on the ground up into the crowns of trees. While in other cases, depending on the risk, it can be more intense in some cases. All of those comments are relevant to that larger scale fuel management prescription development. So when it comes to the small scale fuel management, I think oftentimes there is plenty of scope for balancing the retention of high-value environmental features when the scale and intensity of action is so small. When it's really picking up a few dead things on the ground or pruning out branches that are close to a fence line or to somebody's eaves, it really doesn't need to have that significant of an environmental impact. But I do take the question for the larger scale fuel management, and that is the purpose of the fuel management prescription. It's to identify what the environmental as well as other values are on the site so that they can be protected during implementation. So that's a question that might need to be answered through that process. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess my comments are more, or concerns are more about where we go from here. I found the report was really informative, a lot of good information there and quite balanced and thorough, and so thank you very much for that work. I have a couple questions about where do we go from here? If we were to adopt, like in the second recommendation, it says that council endorses the action plan. Does that mean that we're basically committed to those 31 items, and is there further opportunity to discuss them, go more in depth? For instance, the hiring of a fire smart person in these times when we're being asked to pay for a lot of the different things. There's a lot of competing priorities in our budget. I just would like to make sure that we look at all of the options. Like, is there an opportunity to share a fire smart coordinator with another local government? Is there an option to do some contracting with people who are already experts in this area? Or so I think this is more probably staff comments. And then the other thing is around, I think it was number 9 in the green waste, and just to mention that the RDN is now moving into the second phase of the green bin. We trialed having garden waste in the green bins, and that I think has been quite successful. And so now they're looking at phase 2, and that's like what size of bins and how do we determine who's going to have those bins, and and upping the size that it would be allowable to put in those bins. So I just want to make sure that we're not kind of in silos, that we're having a conversation with what's going on around us as well. So I don't know if you have any comments, probably not, but.
Thank you, through the chair. So with regards to the resource in question, so the two recommendations that you pulled out are both recommendations that can potentially be funded through future grants. So that recommendation to hire what's called a Fire Smart position, not only is it one of the core components of the program that maintains funding eligibility, it is also something that can be funded. So in order to implement, there is sort of a lot of opportunities, some of the alternatives which you've mentioned in your comments, in order to find ways of avoiding, I guess, adding to the regular operational budget. So there are many opportunities. The CRI program, I think, is, in my opinion, is going through a series of shifts. The program guide and what you can specifically apply for funding does change every year, but it tends to get more permissive over time, as the risk of wildfire is recognized to be increasing throughout British Columbia and affecting its communities more and more regularly. So I think that that one shouldn't be one of too much concern, because I think that there are lots of venues or ways to work around some of the capacity issues without adding too much to the overall cost to the taxpayer. With regards to the green waste program, I did want to just point out that so the green bin program, I'm very happy to hear that it's successful. The recommendation is worded so that it is somewhat enabling, so it does allow staff to consider opportunities that are in partnership with other, organizations or local governments. For context and transparency, I feel that I should mention that I was also heavily involved in the preparation of the complementary community wildfire resiliency plans that are in place for each of the electoral areas that surround this community. And we did have similar recommendations regarding the green waste program and seeking opportunities there. So I'm sure that they would be a willing partner if that was the direction that staff wanted to take.
And so just to follow up on that last comment, because one of the things obviously with a fire is that if a fire starts in Area G, they're not going to wait for permission from the town to move into our boundary. So were there any sort of risks when you were developing those plans adjacent to the town where you think we might want to collaborate with our neighbors to try to address some of those risks more immediately?
Thank you for the question. So the terms of the funding project, we do only look at what's called the local wildfire risk. So the maps in the plan, you'll see they draw a hard boundary around what's called the area of interest, which is, for the purposes of the project, the town boundary. However, the recommendations and the subject area do contain a lot of reference to interagency cooperation. So, for example, through participation in a community fire smart resiliency community on a regional basis, that is a very appropriate venue to discuss some of the risks that are located just outside of that line. And I think that there is good awareness in the community as well as with staff about some of the risks that are coming from outside. So some of those conversations are occurring and will continue under the new framework, which requires participation in that Community Fire Smart Resiliency Committee.
And again, just sort of forgive me because you mentioned you're dealing with the broader region. On Vancouver Island, a lot of the larger woodlots are actually privately owned. They're not publicly owned. And I noticed that you're looking more at publicly owned land. So how do we work with private landowners like the Mosaics of the world or Western Forest Products or whomever it may be to ensure that that sort of load management is taking place throughout the region? Because obviously, if they're not participating, there's a fire that starts, unfortunately, it could spread quite quickly. So if there's any recommendations or things we should be trying to do on our side.
Thank you. Indeed. So the structure of the CFRC is a bit, that's the Community Fire Smart Resiliency Committee, is agnostic, I would say, about who participates. So it enables communities to engage with the actors that they believe are the most important to them. And in that case, those actors include, representatives of, say, Mosaic Forest Products. Mosaic is mentioned in the plan as an organization that should be engaged with on ongoing implementation.
Thank you very much. And just to the last point, too, just for folks, because Councillor Skipsey did raise a great question about when we say we're adopting this plan, how much are we beholden to? I do think that because the second recommendation says we're referring it to our budget process should it be 2026 or 2025? It's just, sorry, through the chair to Mr. Cornell, I guess. Sorry, this to Mr. Cornell. I'm the chair. Sorry, I'm so used to being a councillor. My apologies.
Yeah, through the chair, it'll be for 2026. I think having this plan at this time in the budget cycle isn't going to allow us time to prepare for 2025, so it would be the 2026 budget year, review the recommendations, part of being strategic planning, and then roll it out for next year, or next year's budget cycle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cornell. That's a good clarification. And Councillor Skipsey.
So I just had a question related to that. So I'm wondering if we were to adopt the 3 recommendations, including the action plan, if anything would be actioned right away, the timing of that, or if, the reason for that is because otherwise I would like to introduce an amendment that says that Council endorses the action plan contained within the CRWP 2024 for consideration during strategic planning and within the 2026 budget process.
That's an interesting idea.
So I just didn't want to hold things up if there was something that was going to be actioned, next month, or can most of it wait until strategic planning in the fall when we can have a deeper dive into some of these things and how they're going to take place and scoped.
That's a good point, and I think Chief Cornell has an answer.
Thank you. Through the chair, that would be fine to add it to the recommendation. There will be a couple of the action items that we may need to action before that, and we will bring that back before council in reporting, but adding that item for the majority of them would be quite relevant.
Okay, so I would like to move an amendment that after consideration, we insert during strategic planning and.
So that would be on, forgive me.
Sorry, just for clarity, there's no motion on the floor. Yeah. So when you go to make the motion, use that wording. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. So when we do number 2, we should use the amendment on that, yes, on number 2 specifically. So with that, let's maybe, because we have an amendment in the middle, let's not move all 3. Let's move them individually, if that's okay. If there's no further questions to the consultant, Mr. Shields, thank you so much for your time. That was a great report and very informative. We really appreciate all your work. Thank you. So with that, number 1, if there's a mover and a seconder. Moved, Councillor Skipsey, second, Councillor Young. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And number 2, let's move it first and then do the amendment. So moved. No, I would like to move as amended.
I would like to move that Council endorses the action plan contained within the CRWP 2024 for consideration during strategic planning and within the 2026 budget process.
Okay. And just to Ms. Coates, that's okay to do it right off the bat?
Yes, that is the preferred way.
Okay. Well, if that's preferred, we will definitely do it that way then. Seconder, Councillor Vander, Valk. Yeah, and just to Councillor Skipsey's point, I think that's really reasonable. The other thing I want to highlight too, for folks who care passionately about the environment, the emissions from the wildfires and the bad years for the wildfires are 2.5 times the total emissions of our province. So every business, every car, everything combined is much less than the bad wildfire years. So this is the single most important thing we could probably do for the environment, I think, in our area, is to try to pass this. Okay, and with that, all in favor? Passes as amended. And then number 3, as is. Mover, Councillor Skipsey. And then Councillor Vander Valk. All in favor? Wonderful, thank you very much. Passes unanimously again. Now moving on to the Regional District Nanaimo Fire Services Agreement. I think we've sort of discussed this briefly. Do we need a staff report on this, or is this something we should just move as is? Chief Cornell.
I think we've got the information. This is just bringing back the fire service agreement that we approved a couple years ago. It's been through the RDN board for approval. We just need final approval from council to initiate this contract, this agreement.
I think that we could move both of them as a block. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, Valk, all in favor? Passes. And then we have financial services. And I'm not sure if who's going to speak to this one. We're just shuffling the chairs on the deck, and I believe Mr. Hare will be presenting on this in a moment.
Thank you, Chair Harrison. The 2023 financial statement information package attached to the staff report, also known as a SOFI, is a legislated reporting requirement of the Financial Information Act. The SOFI report must be approved by Council before June 30th. The report format is prescribed by the province and includes the following schedules. There's a council and staff remuneration and expenses for the year. There's a list of supplier payments for the year with payments of over $25,000 to each supplier identified separately. There's also a schedule of long-term debt that the municipality holds, and there's a number of reconciliations, a few schedules on reconciliations, and then there's a schedule of guarantees and indemnity agreements and severance agreements if there were any during the year. And the financial and it also includes the financial statements for the town, which have been previously received by council. So I won't go through the individual schedules in the report in this meeting. However, I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have on the schedules themselves.
Thank you very much. And with that, are there any questions on the schedules to Mr. Hare? I will say that our town financial staff, even in the previous term before Mr. Hare arrived, had a very good reputation when we were working with folks like auditors and whatnot, and we retained that actually throughout. So kudos to our financial team for making sure the numbers all add up, kind of important in government. With that, I think we are receiving the document and approving it. Councillor Skipsey, so moved. Councillor Vander, Valk, seconded. Okay. And are there any further discussion on the statement of financial information? Seeing none. All those in favor? Passes unanimously again. Thank you very much. And as is standard, if you want to submit comments about our meeting, there is a specific email address to do so. It's the communications@qualicumbeach.com. Not to be confused with QB Town, which is the rest of the time you can send our emails to. There's nothing in close. And with that, a motion to adjourn. Councillor Vander Valk, Councillor Young, all in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your patience as I'm learning the ropes here. Have a good day.